intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Julian Wong, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, December 21st, 2025 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. After a century, Lithuania troupe is still thriving. Out from Russia's shadow, the National Ballet Company is continuing to raise its profile. Vilnius, Lithuania. The lobby of the state-owned theater beside the Neris River in Vilnius, Lithuania, drips with yellow glass. Its 72 chandeliers were shipped from the former East Germany 50 years ago. Jurgita Dronina, the new artistic director of the Lithuanian National Opera and Ballet Theater's ballet company, sipped champagne beneath this matrix of light on a December evening. The curtain had just fallen on the world premiere of a new Coppelia, celebrating the company's 100th birthday, and Dronina, surrounded by her dancers, was overcome with emotion. "I don't think we realize how big this night is," she said, shaking her head incredulously. "People will be talking about this moment in another 100 years. The centenary's significance feels bigger than the sum of its years. Lithuanian ballet has managed to persist, and often thrive, over a brutal century that has seen several occupations, war, and economic uncertainty. Now, with confidence in its survival skills, the ballet company is eager to raise its profile from a company of regional importance to one that can rank among Europe's best. The eagerness is all over the company's ambitious anniversary plans, which began with the contemporary reworking of Coppelia and continued with a showcase by ballet students from the state-funded M.K. Čiurlionis School of Art in Vilnius, the company's official feeder program. The festivities were to culminate in an international gala this weekend, featuring famous dancers from the Vienna State Ballet, Paris Opera Ballet, Royal Ballet, La Scala Theatre, and more. Dronina, a former principal dancer with the National Ballet of Canada, became the Lithuanian Ballet's artistic director in January, at a complicated moment for the country. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Lithuania's major performing arts institutions have stopped performing Russian content, instituting what the Ministry of Culture has called a mental quarantine. But Lithuanian ballet is indebted to Russian influence. More than at the symphony or opera, the ban affects the repertoire. No Tchaikovsky hits, Swan Lake or Sleeping Beauty, or ballets with scores by Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet, or Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring. When Christina Gudzinite, a principal dancer, learned that Romeo and Juliet had been pulled from the season in 2022, she was crushed. "My heart was bleeding," she said. "I love the classics, and I had been waiting and waiting for that ballet." Politics haven't stopped Dronina from generating change, more than the ballet company has seen in 50 years. "I want to do what Tamara Rojo did at the English National Ballet," she said, of her mentor and former boss, whom she still calls at all hours for advice. Tamara took a touring company and made it absolutely world-class. Dronina was born in Saratov in Soviet-era Russia in 1986 and raised in Vilnius by her Lithuanian mother. She was a principal at the Royal Swedish Ballet and the Dutch National Ballet before joining the National Ballet of Canada in 2016, where she was an international star among largely homegrown talent. The next year, she was hired as a lead principal at the English National Ballet and spent 3 seasons performing with both companies. A luminous dancer, noted for her refined grace and emotional sensitivity, Janina is determined to elevate the Lithuanian company's artistry and technique. She has lengthened the duration of company class, insisted the women take class on point, and introduced a separate point class that she teaches herself. She has changed the daily schedule from an Eastern European model of late evening rehearsals offset by long midday breaks to a 10 a.m. to 5 a.m. workday, giving the dancers a better work-life balance and the opportunity to go to the symphony or theater on nights they don't perform. Many of these changes are informed by Janina's work ethic as a dancer. She was famous for her epic energy, sometimes performing lead roles in different ballets in Canada and Europe the same week. She also benefited from having work created on her, something she feels is essential for her dancers in the company. This spring, the French choreographer Manuel Legris will create a new Paquita, and there's a co-production with the Estonian National Ballet in the works. As artistic director, Janina succeeds the choreographer Martinis Remakis, whose ballets have become an important part of the company's identity. His Coppelia is a sinister, stylized work performed largely off-point to a dramatically revised score by the Lithuanian composer Žyvaris Jasinskis. The staging turns away from the ballet's usual humor to get closer to Leo Delibes's original source material, E.T.A. Hoffmann's nightmarish short story, The Sandman, about trauma and obsession. With choreography that continuously bends and folds inward, and a set that features a giant bald head and eerie childlike creatures, the effect is decidedly bleak. Coppelia wasn't an arbitrary choice for the company's centenary. It was the work that introduced Lithuania to ballet in 1925, when the Russian choreographer Pavel Petrov produced a version of the classic at the State Theatre in Kaunas. Vilnius was then occupied by Poland. Still recovering from more than a century of Imperial Russian rule, Lithuanian theatergoers could have balked at this Russian-identified art form presented by a Russian dance master. Instead, ballet was embraced as a symbol of the country's emerging cultural affluence, a sign the newly independent state was developing its own professional arts scene. That pride and self-determination have characterized Lithuania's attitude toward ballet over the past 100 years. Even when the country was part of the Soviet Union and was watched carefully by the Kremlin, the ballet company still invested in local composers and choreographers, developing several distinctly national works that drew on Lithuanian folklore and heritage. With the threat of Russian expansion looming once again, signs of solidarity with Ukraine are ubiquitous across Vilnius. Flags drape from windows and city buses flash "Vilnius loves Ukraina" between destination updates. Today, the Lithuanian Ballet Company is fiercely proud of its accomplishments. Average seat occupancy is 97%, among the highest in Europe, and a recent Opera Europa study showed it had the highest attendance of people under 35 of ballet companies across the continent. Artists once fled Lithuania in droves, but now many are returning. Today, more than 80% of the company's 74 dancers are Lithuanian, several of whom left the country only to come back. Edvinas Jakonis, a principal soloist, spent 2 years at the English National Ballet before returning to Vilnius, where he grew up watching Remakis' choreography. "I always dreamed of dancing something by Martinis," he said between Coppelia rehearsals. "Every character has a wound in their heart that they carry throughout the story. It's very personal." Janina has made a concerted effort to bring Lithuanian talent back from abroad. Many of these dancers grew up together, training in the ballet department of the M.K. Corleone School of Art, where they boarded and studied in their adolescence. Jernina, a graduate of this program, remains closely connected to the school. Her mother works as a night mom at the school's residence when she isn't babysitting her grandchildren, Jernina's daughter, age 2, and sons, 4 and 13. Being a mother and ballerina obliged Jernina to make choices that she doesn't want to force on her dancers. In 2023, she felt she needed to return to the stage 3.5 weeks after giving birth. No dancer should have to make such drastic decisions, she said. I will always make sure to guide and support ballerinas who want to combine motherhood with their careers. This is part of Jernina's plan to invest in dancer wellness. She organized the company's first ballet symposium earlier this fall, hosting lectures on mental health and dance psychology. She is committed to nurturing each dancer, pushing them beyond their comfort zone and refusing to pigeonhole anyone as classical or contemporary, a tacit practice in some companies. Conventional rules about hierarchy and promotion don't interest her either. Last spring, she pulled an 18-year-old student out of the ballet school to dance the Queen of the Dryads, a lead role in Don Quixote, despite colleagues telling her it was a reckless idea. The student, Yeva Repsit, is now a company soloist who is dancing the lead in the second cast of the new Coppelia. Some of her initiatives have prompted pushback. One of the most contentious changes has been normalizing performing one work in the evening while rehearsing or creating another during the day. This was ordinary for Jernina in her career, but has been met with resistance by dancers who want to save themselves for their big night on stage. I lead by example, Jernina said. I hope that my career has proved that hard work, discipline, and unwavering love for this art form brings results. The morning after the Coppelia premiere, the dancers gathered for company class in a windowless studio with dated wood paneling on the theater's second floor. Jernina entered, looking energized and pleased. She offered brief congratulations on a job well done, and, without delay, found a place at the bar and started to teach. Under the Big Top, a pup squad. Juan Quiros' trained dogs dance, prance, and backflip at the Big Apple Circus. Juan Quiros believes that nearly any dog can be a circus dog. Dogs, they're smart, he said. They find a way. Not every dog can do every trick, and breeding matters. The short-legged, long-bodied dachshund, for example, will never execute a backflip. But a good trainer, like Quiros believes himself to be, can teach most any dog to perform. You need to see the dog to see the body, to think what you can do with that body, he said authoritatively on a brisk morning in New York City just before Thanksgiving. Quiros, a third-generation Chilean-American circus performer, was putting his co-stars through their paces. Inside the otherwise deserted tent of the Big Apple Circus, housed on the southwest corner of Lincoln Center, Quiros and his assistant, Gerard Whitehouse, dazzling in a rhinestone-bedecked bodysuit, urged a pack of dogs to dance and prance, to leap over or scurry under metal hurdles. Quiros, snazzy in blue sequins, cued them with commands in Spanish and various hand signals. Between routines, he lay on the Big Top's carpeted floor and let the dogs nuzzle him. Mentored by an uncle, Jose Olate, Quiros has been working with dogs since 1998. A different uncle, Richard Olate, led the Olate dog troupe that won America's Got Talent in 2012. Quiros currently travels in a caravan with 14 dogs, including 3 trainees and 4 retirees. The 7 current performers, including Copo, Diana, Susie, Tomasa, Lana, Riso, and Charlotte, poodles, poodle mixes, and 1 Yorkie. Quarras believes that poodles aren't necessarily smarter or more nimble, but the ones he trains are on the smaller side, which makes them easier to travel with and live beside. These dogs are an international troop, some Colombian, some Chilean, some American. 2 are litter mates, but otherwise they are unrelated. Most of them are females, because females, Quarras said, are a little easier to train. And while a couple are rescues, Quarras purchases most of his dogs from breeders, so that he doesn't have to compensate for the neglect or harm a rescue dog may have experienced. The Big Apple Circus, which has operated, barring a brief bankruptcy hiatus since 1977, phased out its exotic animals more than 2 decades ago. It now only hosts domestic animals. Quarras doesn't begin training the dogs until they are about a year old. "No, I let them play," he said. And while the training varies from dog to dog, he estimates that it takes about 6 months to make one tent ready. Once a dog is a part of the act, it is a working life of about a decade before downshifting into retirement. How does he know when a dog is ready to retire? "They tell me," Quarras said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features for the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The dogs have different abilities and different personalities. A diva, a sweetheart, a lunatic, a star. Each contributes to the act, or as Quarras likes to say, all the monkeys work. Some of the dogs even help to shape the act. The bit when a dog goes down a slide backward. That was a canine improvisation. So is a gag in which a dog pushes down hurdles instead of jumping over them. Over the years, 1 or 2 dogs have suffered stage fright, but the rest seem unfazed by the noise and the crowds. "They are very focused on me," Quarras said. "I am more important than the audience." Quarras is secretive about his training methods, but he did offer a few clues. Patience was key, and consistency, but also flexibility, because not every dog learns the same way. Dogs are smart, but the trainer, he said, has to be smarter to make the training easy and pleasurable. He uses treats at the beginning, but not too many. He wants the dogs to perform for the pleasure of the routines themselves, not for any reward. And besides, these dogs are elite athletes. A dog who has eaten 1 too many treats will struggle to do a backflip. The dogs perform once or twice each circus day for about 6 minutes. Practice is minimal, so much of the day is spent in the caravan with Quarras and Whitehouse or running around a fenced-in pen outside of it. On tour in other cities, the dogs have more room to run, but New York City real estate offers less untenanted space. The rest of the time is taken up with grooming and care. Coat, ears, nails, and teeth. Are the dogs happy performing? Quarras thinks so. During the interview, there was some growling and at least one attempt to lick a voice recorder. But otherwise, the dogs were beautifully behaved and seemingly cheerful as they rehearsed the conga line, ran atop a wheel, executed backflip after backflip. Throughout, Quarras spoke gently to them and was unstinting in his affection. This perhaps was that proprietary secret, more important than any innate athleticism or musculature. "You need to love them to be able to do this," he said. A champion of American music. George Frederick Bristow, born in 1825, promoted the symphonies of a new country. Can a French horn be played with a fish in its bell, or a trombone if filled with water? An experimental composer might tackle these questions in a piece about threats to ocean wildlife or rising sea levels. But nearly 2 centuries ago, one young musician asked them for a less noble purpose: revenge. That man was George Frederick Bristow, born 200 years ago this month. He was one of the country's finest early composers, a musical jack of all trades, and a compassionate school teacher, as well as a skilled fisherman and, yes, a prankster. Bristow venerated the European classical tradition and wrote squarely within it. But capturing a growing sense of cultural independence, he used tried and true genres like the symphony to tell American stories with musical sounds and imagery familiar to ordinary people. As the United States looks toward its 250th anniversary next year, reflecting on Bristow's accomplishments in a harsh environment for American musicians can help us appreciate the resilience required to make classical music a living, vital art in this country. Born in Brooklyn and aptly named after George Frederick Handel, Bristow began piano lessons with his father at age 5. He recounted that sweat poured down his father's face while teaching him to read music, an anxiety that faded only when George received an encore at his debut recital 4 years later. George's father performed in local theaters, and the boy followed his lead. Theater orchestras at the time could be anything from a motley crew missing several instruments, or a full complement of skilled professionals. By age 12, George had progressed from making 75 cents a night on percussion to $8 a week on violin. Much to his annoyance, his taskmaster father pocketed the cash. Bristow's trajectory rose with the founding of the Philharmonic Society, now called the New York Philharmonic, in 1842. He and his father were inaugural members, but during its first season, older musicians forced George to substitute in theaters on nights when they were double booked. He naturally wanted to play great classical repertoire with them and rebelled. Seeking payback, he caused all kinds of trouble, like ruining the brass instruments, greasing a cello bow, and dousing the community snuff box with lamp oil. One of his first victims was his father. And the strategy worked. George performed as a Philharmonic violinist every season for all but one of the next 40 years. Bristow's colleagues highly valued his instrumental talents. Beginning in 1850, he served as concertmaster of both the Philharmonic and the famed Swedish soprano, Jenny Lind's touring orchestra. He also performed as a soloist with the Philharmonic on 2 occasions, on violin and piano. But his most ambitious goal was composition. The Philharmonic's founding documents required it to program at least one grand orchestral composition, written in the United States each season. It was first followed through in 1846, with an overture by George Loder, an English theater orchestra director from Bristow's youth. A year later, Bristow became the first American-born composer to benefit from the policy when the orchestra premiered an overture one critic panned as unoriginal. Unfazed, he persuaded Jenny Lind's conductor to open concerts with it. Eventually, the Philharmonic lost its resolve to program new American music, leading to complaints that it had abandoned a core aim. A prominent magazine reported in late 1849 that the public was growing impatient after learning the Philharmonic had slow-walked the premiere of Bristow's First Symphony. Hostility grew into May 1850, forcing the orchestra to schedule the work hastily at season's end. Bristow's champions, especially the composer-critic William Henry Fry, saw the move as a token gesture rather than reform. In February of 1853, he chastised the Philharmonic for not doing more to support Bristow or any American. The New Yorker Staatszeitung a German-American newspaper, argued that Bristow's symphony should have been performed in London, Paris, Hamburg, Berlin, Leipzig, and Vienna. Rare praise from that immigrant community. Soon, Bristow would get his revenge against the prickly Philharmonic as well. The magnetic, foppish, London-based conductor Louis-Antoine Julien arrived in the United States later that year with an all-star orchestra and immediately began performing American pieces, including music by Bristow, on an extended tour. Audiences everywhere loved it all. Fry used his column in the New York Daily Tribune to embarrass the Philharmonic after the successful premiere of an excerpt from Bristow's Second Symphony, which Julien had commissioned. "Is not New York as large as Vienna and larger?" Fry wrote, referring to the Vienna Philharmonic, also founded in 1842. Then why defer to any German town? Julien's advocacy of American works led the controversy to boil over in 1854, mostly at Fry's instigation. The ordinary reserved Bristow entered the fray when the Philharmonic's defenders noted that the orchestra would perform more American music if it were good enough. Naturally, he was insulted. Is there a Philharmonic Society in Germany for the encouragement solely of American music, he fumed. If all their artistic affections are unalterably German, let them pack back to Germany and enjoy the police and bayonets and aristocratic kicks and cuffs of that land, where an artist is a serf to a nobleman. Incensed, Bristow immediately resigned as concertmaster of the Philharmonic and refused to perform for the entire next season. Julien continued to prove that Bristow's music was good, precisely the payback he needed. After returning to Britain that summer, Julien programmed it there. The concertmaster of his orchestra told Bristow that British audiences considered him the American composer. Bristow used his Philharmonic hiatus to pursue other projects, notably his opera Rip Van Winkle, as well as numerous engagements as a conductor, pianist, and organist, his biographer Catherine Preston has chronicled. He served just desserts when the Philharmonic agreed to perform the full Second Symphony upon his return as a violinist during the 1855 to 1856 season. We may never know if that was a negotiated settlement. If Bristow's name is known today, it is most likely for his stand against the Philharmonic. But his career continued to flourish and evolve over the next several decades. Most notably, Rip Van Winkle signified a shift in his compositional focus toward American subjects, delighting his patriotic supporters. Patrick S. Gilmore, a celebrity bandmaster, programmed the Great Republic Overture in Philadelphia as a centerpiece on Independence Day in 1876. And the Gibbenenosay Overture, inspired by the American novel Nick of the Woods, graced the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. The Brooklyn Philharmonic commissioned Bristow's most pictorial work in this vein, the Arcadian Symphony, and premiered it in 1873, scooping his old Manhattan enemy. This music paints an evocative portrait of westward settlers, with the four movements depicting their stark journey: evening rest, a stereotyped Native American war dance, and their joyous arrival. Other major pieces, including a mass and two oratorios, augmented Bristow's profile as a choral director in sacred and secular contexts. One critic described the oratorio Daniel, premiered by the Mendelssohn Union in 1867, as the most important musical work yet by an American. Like his European contemporaries, Bristow also wrote prolifically in small genres: songs, piano miniatures, and chamber music, all revealing characteristic charm. Today, the Gossamer Strands of Dreamland for piano could easily serve as a compelling recital replacement for canonical 19th century preludes, nocturnes, or intermezzos. Bristow's catalog include easier works aligning with his decades-long career as a music teacher in Manhattan's public schools, which began around the time of his Philharmonic resignation. Contrary to his outward stubbornness during the feud, his work with students shows a softer side. Many of his pupils were first-generation German immigrants, perhaps even the children of his orchestra colleagues. In 1870, Bristow requested permission from a school board overseeing his German-speaking students to enlist hundreds of them, ranging in age from 7 to 14, to participate in a grand juvenile festival celebrating Beethoven's centennial. At a performance crowded to the last inch, children dressed in white sang excerpts by Mendelssohn, Bellini, Rossini, and of course, Beethoven. One enthusiastic critic remarked that Bristow was accomplishing wonders. Try as he might to steer clear, controversy continued to find Bristow, the quiet fisherman, in his twilight years at his home in the Morrisania area of the Bronx. In May 1893, the Czech composer Antonin Dvorak, having recently arrived in New York, proclaimed that American composers should adapt African-American folk song into classical idioms to develop a distinctly national style. Debates about music, race, and national identity raged in the press until the Philharmonic premiered Dvorak's New World Symphony in December, only to reignite. For his part, Bristow said little, but one observer remarked that the elder statesman's latest symphony included a breakdown, an African-American dance, making Bristow the first composer to incorporate Dvorak's ideas in an actual piece. That wasn't exactly true. This new symphony, subtitled Niagara, was a gigantic choral work echoing Beethoven's monumental Ninth. Stylistically eclectic, it includes intentional quotations of Handel, Protestant hymn tunes, parlor songs, and folk dance, all wrapped in Bristow's characteristically learned forms and Mendelssohnian orchestral coloring. Capturing the majestic wonders of Niagara Falls, a potent natural symbol of boundless possibility, the symphony's 1898 Carnegie Hall premiere planted Bristow's final American musical flag. He died suddenly after collapsing at school a few months later. Next month, and with brass instruments free of unwanted liquid obstructions, the American Symphony Orchestra and Leon Botstein will give Niagara its second performance ever, again at Carnegie Hall. If it's a roaring success, that could be Bristow's greatest act of revenge yet. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Wholesome isn't a dirty word. The comedians Nate Bargatze, Leanne Morgan, and Dusty Slay are leading a family-friendly scene. Nashville. The comic Dusty Slay looks and sounds like a guy who curses. Then there's his name, which would fit into the Attitude Era of the WWE. And yet, there he was on a Sunday night in September, in his signature baseball cap over long, heavy metal hair, standing in front of the words, "Good, Clean Fun," the title of a weekly PG-rated show at the Zanies Comedy Club in Nashville. The incongruity is at the core of this crafty, old-school act. Fiddling with his hat the way Rodney Dangerfield adjusted his tie, Slay begins by deploying his catchphrase. "We're having a good time," he says, the refrain operating like a steady bass line to his set. Once into his material, he sells the idea that he's just sharing random thoughts. "I like to look at birds," he muses, before distinguishing that from bird watching. There's a difference, he insists, illustrating the point by acting out a scene between two guys. "You looking at a girl over there," says one. Then he deepens his voice into something creepy and leers, "No, I'm watching her. It was a sexually tinged joke that in his deft delivery stayed just this side of wholesome. The packed crowd loved it. Sitting near me, a businessman from Augusta, Georgia, said that he always went to this show when he was in town. The fan, who pointed out that Slay taped his podcast next door, added that he liked clean comedy, and one of the reasons seemed less prudish than purist. Using dirty words is cheap. As an alternative to the coasts, the stand-up scene that gets the most attention these days is in Austin, Texas. But Nashville, I'd argue, is the more important comedy city. It has a large industry footprint. 800-pound Gorilla, a producer of specials that aims to be the Netflix of comedy, is there, and a major destination for podcast guests. It's where Theo Von tapes his show. But most important, Nashville has emerged as the center of a resurgent clean comedy scene. Brian Regan and Jim Gaffigan have built long, lucrative careers on inoffensive, sexless material. But they remain exceptions in a world of 2-drink minimums and age requirements for attendance. In the past few years, however, 3 family-friendly stand-ups, Dusty Slay, Leanne Morgan, and Nate Bargatze, have become stars on Netflix while living in Tennessee and working out new material at Zanies. Slay, who hosts a podcast with Bargatze and 2 others, is one of the funniest comics working today. He released a dynamite Netflix special this year titled Wet Heat. Morgan wrote and starred in Leanne, a recent Netflix sitcom produced by Chuck Lorre, and just released her second special, Unspeakable Things, also on Netflix. Bargatze looms largest, as a comedian and a tastemaker. He was the highest-grossing touring comedian in the United States last year, and in an even more impressive display of popularity, his awkward, critically panned stint as host of the Emmys still resulted in higher ratings than the previous ceremony. Bargatze has a vision that goes beyond stand-up. After moving back to Nashville from Los Angeles, he created a clean comedy empire with his company, Nateland. He produces live shows, including Good Clean Fun, new podcasts, like one featuring the comic Dustin Nickerson and his wife, Melissa, and specials from Safe for Work comics like Greg Warren, the salesman, and Ryan Hamilton, whose next hour Bargatze directed. Bargatze just signed up to host a game show on ABC. There is a distinct aesthetic that Bargatze champions. Relatable, apolitical, inoffensive. Clean-cut white men are well represented. The extent of the Nate Bargatze phenomenon may not be entirely clear because he does not show up in the discourse. He doesn't beef with other stars and steers clear of controversy. His success stems from the insight that audiences still wanted, but weren't getting. The kind of escapist, broadly likable comedy that was a regular part of the cultural diet on network television in the 1980s and 1990s. As the culture fragmented and went online, comics started competing for niches while the middle was increasingly ignored. And when the Anything Goes internet replaced television as the major entry point for a career, comedy styles changed. The culture that made stars of Ray Romano and Jerry Seinfeld was now producing comics like the moodily confessional Gerard Carmichael and the ranting, nihilistic podcaster Tim Dillon. More than any other breakthrough comic of the last decade, Bargatze exploited this overlooked commercial opportunity. His specials aimed for everyone, shunned profanity, and positioned him as a family man. His young daughter introduced him on stage. But he also avoided being too corny. His emotional register ran cold and slightly cranky, zeroing in on irritations with hotel rooms, aging, marriage. And from a business point of view, he intentionally reached audiences others ignored. He is the only comic I have seen play Radio City Music Hall at 5 o'clock p.m., a time when you can draw grandparents and children alike. Slay and Bargatze both act dopier than they are. Every history movie I watch on the edge of my seat, Bargatze deadpans. They are Southern comics with accents. They wear it lightly. And they don't play the country rube the way the stars of the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, another clique of Southern stand-ups, did in the early 2000s. These new clean comedians feel as if they have arrived in a time machine, from an era where before the culture wars took over. Sometimes this makes their work lack specificity or personality, like a tasteful hotel lobby. But this blandness also gets at the escapist core of their appeal. They convey a red state sensibility in a way that Seinfeld projected a Jewish one, obvious and meaningful to most people, but subtle enough to be ignored or missed by others. They're traditionalists who make references to NASCAR, Cracker Barrel, and country music. You are more likely to hear about church and Christianity in their seats than at acts and clubs on the coasts. But to the extent they connect their background to anything political, it's in the subtext. Bargatze praises the work of PETA in a way that assumes his audience might find it overly woke. In his recent special, Slay gently poked fun at COVID restrictions, then immediately softened it by saying, "Okay, we're having a good time." Morgan, a vivid storyteller who lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and grew up in a small town outside Nashville, is, like Slay, cleaner than she seems. She leans into the perspective of a woman with a past. In a scene where older women rarely break through, she didn't become famous until she was a grandmother in her 50s. Morgan has shot to fame lately with an act rooted in nostalgic pleasures. She repeatedly says that in her youth she lived it up, and you believe her. There's a sneaky swagger and poetry to her southern charm. Describing her comedy roots in sales, she told Seth Meyers on Late Night that she started selling jewelry in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains to make a little money to get my hair highlighted. She can be bawdy, but discreetly so, like a Hitchcock movie. The dirt is left to the imagination. In her previous special, she curses once, but with such a sugary southern accent that you barely notice. But whereas Bargatze hints at a throwback appeal, Morgan is more overt. She leans into folkishness, describing an aging member of the Def Leppard as barely a-going, and when she is surprised, her mouth gapes into a mug right out of vaudeville. Leanne, which stayed on the Netflix top 10 for weeks, looks to the past as much as she does. Everything about the aesthetic of this show suggests a network sitcom from the 1980s or 90s, including the theme song, the laugh track, and the credits. Even the cast seems designed to make us think of our favorite shows of yesteryear. Kristen Johnston from Third Rock from the Sun plays her sister, Celia Weston from Alice, her mother, and Blake Clark from Home Improvement, her father. Just seeing these familiar faces evokes pleasant childhood memories for many. As with Home Improvement, this is a project that began with a stand-up act. In the first episode, when her husband leaves her, Morgan repurposes a line. Men only have so many words they use in a day. I once conducted something of an experiment to see how family-friendly stand-up could be. For a week, I tried to take my 7-year-old daughter to live shows that wouldn't make either of us uncomfortable. It was largely a mortifying failure. I concluded that my parenting instincts were questionable and that there was a large untapped comedy market. Another way to put this, part of the new clean comedy is just good business. As comedy gets more digital and audiences discover stand-up online rather than in clubs, more young people are becoming fans. And making entertainment that they can watch with their parents can be lucrative. Look at the careers of two of the most successful comedians ever, Bill Cosby and Jerry Seinfeld. Years before he served time in jail for sexual assault, Cosby was known as an artist who could be sanctimonious about dirty comedy. In the concert film Raw, Eddie Murphy imitates Cosby, calling him up to complain about the foul language in his act, or as he memorably put it, the filth flarn filth. Seinfeld has said there is too much cursing in comedy, arguing that comics use it to get a laugh that they wouldn't otherwise. He told Mark Maron he liked working clean because it was so much more difficult. He's not wrong. Cursing is a tremendously useful tool, and it can be a crutch. At Good Clean Fun, a few comics struggled, even growing defensive about staying clean. When a bearded stand-up in a Golden Girls t-shirt introduced himself by saying, "I'm going to be doing some clean comedy for y'all," he sounded worried. What distinguishes the new clean comics is that they do not speak about cursing by their peers with disdain or condescension. They are not judgmental. The culture has become so coarse that dismissing cursing would be silly, an insistence that comics should not reflect the world as it is. On a recent podcast, Slay and Bargatze discussed clean comedy as a lost art that young comics would be wise to learn. You don't have to be clean, but at least know how to be, Bargatze said, making the move from clean to dirty sound as useful as code switching. Comedians like Sarah Silverman and Anthony Jeselnik often soften the impact of an offensive joke with an innocent smile. In a way, Slay and Morgan are doing the reverse. They make wholesome material seem less so. At Good Clean Fun, Slay built tension by worrying about his ability to tell a story about a pit bull. "I'm not sure this is going to be clean," he said, pausing to let the audience snicker over what was to come. Most nights at a club, this joke would not come close to testing good taste. But family-friendly comedy has new boundaries to play with. Only at a clean show could this story have the titillation of a dirty joke. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hollywood confronts our political moment. This year, directors in a variety of genres finally figured out how to deal with this tumultuous period. One of the funniest moments in cinema this year occurs deep in Ari Aster's pandemic fantasia, Eddington. The screen has gone dark. Ominous music begins, all horns and rumbling bass. As the camera pulls back, we see what's so sinister. An Instagram post on a phone screen from a user named Megan Bailey _00. It's just a black square, and beneath it is one phrase, Blackout Tuesday. It seemed as if viewers either loved or hated Eddington, but both times I saw it, that shot sent the entire audience into giggles, presumably remembering what now feels like a cringy moment of keyboard activism in the weird, wild summer of 2020. But Eddington is really about 2025. The big bad in the film is not the pandemic or mask mandates or anything that scans as 2020 coded. It's the giant AI data centers that the local government has agreed to allow on the fringes of town, which presumably will suck up the water in this already arid New Mexico region. Everyone is fighting about toilet paper rations and Dr. Anthony Fauci, but we're watching from 5 years away and can spot the sick irony. Whether Eddington felt exasperating or bracing depended on your outlook. But big-budget movies with A-list stars and buzzy marketing campaigns have not generally known how to address what might be best termed our current moment. In fact, the Trump era writ large, with its technocracy, reality show antics, and social media misinformation beginning in his first administration in 2016, has not been notable for politically incisive filmmaking. There have been a few exceptions. Get Out, Parasite, a number of documentaries. For the most part, however, filmmakers trying to address this moment have swung and missed, turning out clunkers like Don't Look Up and Bombshell. Yet Signs of Life arrived in 2025. Not all of these movies have worked, but it seemed as if, at last, Hollywood storytellers were wrapping their heads around how to explain this period and reflect it back to us. They looked to a variety of genres and thought metaphorically, mythologically, and historically. While at times the studios making the movies seemed to have missed the filmmakers' memos, the productions knew exactly what they were about. Eddington might have been the most controversial of 2025's political movies, but Ryan Coogler's Sinners was probably the most talked about. It combines music and horror and history for an explosively bloody story about the lingering effects of enslavement, colonialism, and racism in one Jim Crow-era Mississippi town. Rather than settle for a baldly allegorical plot, Coogler opts for a tale that zigs and zags, allowing for many readings and serving up legends and vampires, gospel, and the blues. Shift from horror to superhero movies, which have long stumbled incoherently when it comes to politics, it shouldn't have been surprising to see how much commentary James Gunn packed into Superman, given the Man of Steel's deep roots as an anti-fascist, anti-corruption warrior for truth, justice, and well, you know. But in Gunn's hands, Superman's main antagonist is a hyped-up tech bro inventing what appears to be a janky AI clone of Superman himself, and who uses bots to spread misinformation and farm outrage against the hero. And that's just one of the many clear references to our milieu in the film. Among the most critically lauded films of the year is the Paul Thomas Anderson drama, One Battle After Another, which loosely adapts and updates Thomas Pykin's Reagan-era novel Vineland. The movie is no screed or manifesto. It's about what it means for political activism to evolve over generations. The characters are all figuring out that they'll never get the world they're working for, but they're going to have to hand it over, a big topic in a time when gerontocracy is at the center of the political discourse. Meanwhile, Rian Johnson's Wake Up Dead Man, the third in the Knives Out murder mystery series, takes on the rising tide of Christian nationalism and the power-hungry leaders who would whip up cults of celebrity. He smartly marries jokes about Doge and feminist Marxists with digs at insecure would-be internet celebrities who tried to divide and conquer the world rather than better it. These movies all land with a bang. Others are squishier. Wicked for Good, Part 2 of John M. Chu's musical adaptation of the Broadway show, continues the first film's metaphor for a nation's slide into authoritarianism and a fight against fascism, but buries it under more palatable platitudes. Luca Guadagnino's head-scratching After the Hunt tries to say something about identity politics and sexual harassment, but is a hopeless muddle. The Running Man, from Edgar Wright, updates the 1987 dystopian film to deliver satirical commentary on inequality and entertainment, but is too broad to overcome more generic eat-the-rich sentiments. And Tron, Ares, directed by Joachim Ronning, circles around some idea about unchecked technocracy and AI, but for the life of me, I can't figure out what. Still, this isn't a bad batting average, with movies about everything from the meddling of Silicon Valley and politics to authoritarianism, nationalism, and racism. And remarkably, most of these opinionated releases were also big hits. Superman and Sinners are likely to finish near the top of the year's domestic box office returns, as will Wicked for Good, Wake Up Dead Man, will undoubtedly be huge on Netflix, and both One Battle After Another and Sinners will probably rake in plaudits all the way to the Oscars. The idea that Hollywood has crammed often liberal-leaning political commentary into popular, high-earning, and even critically acclaimed entertainment may not seem too surprising. But there's some dramatic irony to it in 2025, because many of the companies distributing the movies seem to be distancing themselves from those same politics. This is the year Disney, for instance, temporarily suspended the ABC late-night host Jimmy Kimmel after criticism of comments he made about the man accused of killing the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk. Some of the criticism came from the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Brandon Carr, who suggested that his agency could take action against the network. Paramount produced and distributed The Running Man, in which the villain is a corporation known as the Network, a giant entity that appears to have fused completely with the government and owns all news, entertainment, and a few far worse things. Paramount, of course, paid an extraordinary $16 million to President Trump in July to settle a lawsuit over the editing of an interview on the CBS News news program 60 Minutes. About a week later, Carr announced that the FCC would approve the merger of Paramount and the media company Skydance, owned by David Ellison, the son of the tech titan Larry Ellison, one of the world's richest men. Paramount has also recently shown interest in distributing Rush Hour 4, a favorite franchise in President Trump's catalog and reportedly at his request, with the director Brett Ratner at the helm. Ratner directed Melania, a documentary about the First Lady, Melania Trump. Amazon Prime, which owns MGM, the company behind After the Hunt, reportedly paid $40 million for the rights to distribute the documentary, which will appear on its platform in January. The streamer will also release a 3-part series on her life and travels between New York, Washington, and Palm Beach. The reasons for moves like these and others can be cast as less partisan than pecuniary. Hollywood studios are ultimately beholden to shareholders and aim to maximize profits. Mergers and acquisitions, including those of media companies and movie studios, like Netflix's agreement to acquire Warner Brothers, which produced Sinners, Superman, and One Battle After Another, can require convincing government officials to go along with the plan. And given Trump's history of paying personal attention to media companies, some feel the need to stay on his good side. Take competing bids from Comcast, Paramount, Skydance, and Netflix to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. In truth, social posts, Trump insulted Brian L. Roberts, the chief executive of Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, the studio behind the Wicked films. Ultimately, Netflix announced a deal to acquire the company after Ted Sarandos, a co-chief executive of the company, visited the White House in late November, only for David Ellison to make a hostile bid for Warner Brothers. That move, with partial backing from Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, was made after Ellison was spotted speaking with the president at the Kennedy Center honors ceremony hours earlier. Clearly, money talks, and at the moment, it looks as if Hollywood is talking out both sides of its mouth. Yet, that raises a question. In the future, will we continue to see films from major studios with political leanings? Or will they prove too risky for future corporate profits? Only time will tell, but 2025 may prove to be an inflection point for Hollywood, in more ways than one. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, December 21st, 2025 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. Your reader has been Julian Wong. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the re-airing of this morning's Buffalo News. Following that at 6 p.m. is the Buffalo News Viewpoints. Stay tuned for this reading and more throughout the day. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,